So good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us and for coming out this evening. As every Tuesday, the first Tuesday of the English month, we always hold a lecture, and we try to bring very interesting subjects, stories, and speak about them. It's always good to increase our knowledge in the history of Am Yisrael, in the stories of Am Yisrael, in the traditions of Am Yisrael, and also bringing all of this down to our practical life today, as we like to do in Chassidut, and as Chassidut brings a big emphasis on making things practical, bringing the stories and making them alive once again. So, by the way, if there's any concept or any story or anything that interests you and you want us to do a lecture about that story or about that certain tradition or about any subject, so you can feel free to speak or to me or to Rabbi Goldberg, and we're going to try the best to bring someone or to prepare a specific shiur about that concept. So today, our story is the lost, the 10 lost tribes. And this is a very interesting story because of two reasons. First of all, because it's connected to us in the deepest way possible, which means these are our brothers and sisters that are somewhere out there. And it's very interesting to know what happened to them. And if we can reach them maybe today. Also, what makes this subject interesting is there's a lot of myths and mysterious stories about what happened to the 10 tribes and about where they are present. So this is why we chose this subject to speak about. So it all begins in the pasuk that tells us. It's brought in several places. It's brought in Isaiah. It's brought in Divrei Hayamim, which is the story of days. And this is approximately 3,205 years from the creation of the world, which is 722 years before counting. 135 years before the destruction of the first temple. We know that the temple was destroyed by the Babylonians. And they destroyed the temple that was in the part of Yehuda, in the part of Binyamin, but specifically the part of Yehuda. Let's see, we've got here, this is the map of where Am Yisrael, basically where they rested. And here you can see this is Yerushalayim in the center in that's that's Binyamin. You can see the Yerushalayim, Yericho as well. And basically, the majority, Am Yisrael at a certain point, and I'm going to speak about it in a moment, they split into two. There were the tribes of Binyamin and Yehuda, which was Yerushalayim and the southern part of Eretz Yisrael. And there were the rest of the 10 tribes. Some of them are what we would call the east side of the Jordan River, and of course in the north of Israel. So what happened was the first temple was destroyed by the Babylonians, and that attended basically to the tribe of Binyamin and Yehuda. 135 years before that, King Shalmaneser, the fifth king of Ashur, he basically exiled most of the 10 tribes. And this is only most of them, because researches have been made and they found that the population in Yerushalayim during that period, since the king of Ashur exiled those 10 tribes, it grew tremendously, which means that many of the tribes decided, instead of staying out in the cities that belong to the tribe of Asher and Asher Ephraim, they decided to go into Yerushalayim, which is a protected city. Now, this is the story of the exile, and the reason to the exile that starts before after the times of King Solomon. We know that during the years of King Solomon was an era of gold, basically, where Am Yisrael enjoyed a special period of time. And unfortunately, right after the times of King Solomon, what happened was that Am Yisrael split into two, and Yerovam ben Nevat, he basically led the 10 tribes, and unfortunately he caused them to worship idols. And then there was Rechavia, the son of King Solomon, who continued ruling over Yehuda and Binyamin, those two tribes in the area of Yerushalayim and the southern part of Israel. And basically what happened is that Am Yisrael, throughout those years, the reason why these 10 tribes were exiled is because of the sin of, they basically worshiped idols. And that was preventing them from returning to Yerushalayim. We know that we have 3 times a year an obligation to go to Yerushalayim, to see Hashem, to bring our offerings to the Holy Temple. So how could Yerovam ben Nevat, who wanted to rule over those 10 tribes, how could he prevent all of the tribes going to Yerushalayim? What he did was he basically, on the route, the way to Yerushalayim, he placed altars and other types of idols. And what happened was that Am Yisrael, they used to worship idols there, and they didn't need to go to Yerushalayim. They felt enough of a spiritual satisfaction that they said, you know what, we don't need to travel all the way. And that was the way that he was able to control them. Because, by the way, in the Mishnah it says that one of the only individuals who will not have a place in Olam Haba, which we know, Kol Yisrael yesh lahem chelek l'Olam Haba, all of Am Yisrael has a part in the world to come, right, in the future world. So the only few individuals is Yerovam ben Nevat, because not only that he sinned himself, he caused other people to sin. And because of this sin, we know that Hashem decided that Am Yisrael will need to leave the holy country. And we'll speak about it also towards the end of this year, because our question that we're going to deal with is what will be at the end of days. Are they going to return? So, in the Talmud and in the Midrashim, there are 3 main areas where they say that the king of Ashur exiled those 10 tribes. One is Gozan, Chavor, and Afriki, which are 3 places. And now this is where our mystery begins, because we aren't sure exactly in our days where these places exactly are. So there's been researchers that have been made, and they figured out that Gozan, which is the first place, is right up there. Today, that would be by the Caucasus, maybe by the area of Kurdistan, that area, the border of the northern border of Syria and the border of Syria and Iraq. That's the area of Gozan. Now, what happened is they didn't stop there. So sometimes we cannot go and track the place according to the people that live there currently, because of the fact that they might have moved. And we'll see that many tribes did actually move. And then we have Chavor, and there are also many opinions where exactly Chavor is. Some people say that Chavor is India, the border of India and Afghanistan, that area. And then we've got, of course, Afriki, which reminds us of Africa. It's a very similar word. And there are some people that say that it sounds similar, but it's a different place, actually. So there's those that take it in a literal way, where it's Africa, and we'll speak about certain tribes in Africa, in Uganda, and not only Uganda, but also the Jewish Ethiopian Jews. Beta Yisrael, that we know them as, that's what they called, Beta Yisrael, and they made Aliyah, a lot of them. That some also claim that they are also part of these 10 tribes. Okay, so today, we've got quite a few tribes and certain areas in the world where we can basically track pretty much the origins of these people until Aseret HaShvatim. And here's, for example, the sons of Menashe. The sons of Menashe, they basically started off in China. That's their tradition. And they say that they had in China what's called a holy book. And then they traveled to India. And on the way to India, they basically, or more to Myanmar, where today Myanmar is, and they say that they lost that holy book while traveling to Myanmar. And they have many, many traditions that are very, very similar to our traditions, such as Brit Milah. It's interesting, a lot of the basic laws of the oral Torah, which is basically what our scholars taught us in Babylon and later on, they don't really have. Why? Because they left Eretz Israel way before there was any type of Talmud or any type of Mishnah. So that's why what we know today isn't exactly what they know and what they follow, but there are many, many things that are very similar. Also names. The names that they use there, for example, that they have a story that they always tell, that whenever there's an earthquake or whenever there's typhoon, rains, and things like that, they go outside and they call out to Hashem and they say, Hashem, we are the children of Menashe, please don't harm us. So it's interesting, we see that they are very much aware to their origin. Then we have, of course, Ethiopia. And Ethiopia, the story begins of a Eldad Hadani. Has anyone heard of Eldad Hadani? So Eldad Hadani was a famous a Jewish traveler and a merchant. And this is the 9th century, where he came to certain cities, Jewish cities, and he claimed that he was from the tribe of Dan. That's why he's called Eldad Hadani. He's from the tribe of Dan. And he describes quite a few interesting stories that happened to him. He claims that the 4 tribes are beyond a river called the Samba River. And we'll talk about this river Samba River because it's a very interesting river that has an interesting nature. And his testimony and his stories came to Rabbi Tzemach Gaon. Now, Rabbi Tzemach Gaon was from the time of the Geonim. He was even before the Rishonim. Again, we're talking about over 1,000 years ago. So, and everyone was astonished about his stories because they said, you know what, our brothers are out there somewhere. And Rabbi Tzemach said that a few details are true about his story, but you can tell that other details are exaggerated. And, you know, sometimes when people come up with a story, they have to add a few details that aren't exactly accurate, but make the story sound very nice. So that was the way that the Jewish scholars in that generation related to the story of Eldad Hadani. So they accepted the idea that there are 10 tribes or some tribes out there, but to certain specific details and miraculous details, that was something that they did not always accept and get and take as a fact. By the way, the Ethiopian Jews suffered from persecution throughout their time living. And if we want to speak about something that defines Am Yisrael, unfortunately, is that Am Yisrael went through a severe, very severe times of persecution. We know that there was the Ethiopian Inquisition. And the Ethiopian Inquisition made sure that a lot of the Sifrei Kodesh, the holy books that they had, a lot of them will be destroyed and burnt. And that's why many of them do not have the exact same traditions and as we do, as we have today. Because again, they were persecuted throughout the years, and they suffered a lot from that. And again, the traditions are very similar. For example, keeping Shabbos. For example, breaking glass during the wedding ceremony, which is something very interesting. Why would they do such a thing? No one else does such a thing, right? There's many traditions about how to do the wedding ceremony, many religions that have it this way or that way, but breaking glass is about the Churban, or trying to remember something that we have in our minds, that not everything is complete and our joy isn't full. So, this is the tradition that they have, and this is again not only that, but also names, right? A lot of the names that they use there are Jewish names, and we'll see this also about the Pashtuns, which is a tribe in Afghanistan and Pakistan. And they are basically, they've got also a very interesting story. A lot of the areas, a lot of the places that the Pashtuns live in have Jewish names, such as the Solomon Mountains. Why would they just name them the Solomon Mountains? Because they have a connection to King Solomon, and that's what they remember. So these are names of places, names of areas. The tribes around them, I don't know the exact term and word that they use, but they call them a certain name that they call them one of the 10. One of the 10, those are one of the 10 tribes. And they track themselves actually to Shevet Ephraim. Ephraim was the son of Yosef, the sons of Manasseh, and these are the sons of Ephraim. And once again, we see many traditions that are very, very similar within their traditions to our Jewish traditions. Okay, now we come to a very famous myth and story, and this is about the Samba River. Has anyone here heard of the Samba River? Right, so the Samba River is basically, first of all, it's written down as a place where some of the tribes were exiled to. Me'evel Nahar Samba. And here we have to understand what is the meaning of the Samba. What is the Samba? So the Samba comes from the word Shabbat, Sabbath. Why is that? So here we have a few opinions about the nature of this river. So some people say, it's not some people, it's the Maimonides, the Rambam. He says that this river has a special nature. 6 days of the year, of the week, what it does is it flows, and not only it flows, but it throws rocks, stones, and sand in such a way, it's described in other places, that people cannot go through this river at all. And this is the approach that the Maimonides says. It's interesting. He says that his grandfather, they brought him some of that river, which means they brought sand and stones from that river, and he says that 6 days there was movement in that, whatever it was, a cup, a bowl, whatever it is, where they hold the sand, and on the 7th day it rested. And that is the way that the Rambam approaches it. Again, it's not written in a direct halachic book of the Rambam, so again we can look at it as a medrash. And in that place it says that at a certain point in the history, the year is Hey Alafim Reish Yud Dalet, which is approximately 500, 600 years ago, this nature of the river stopped, which means today it's not that 6 days it works and then only the 7th day it rests. Today maybe it's a regular river, we don't know. I'll soon show you an interesting video about that river. So here we have the approach of the Maimonides of the Rambam. And it doesn't stop there, because there's a famous prayer that we say. The famous prayer is about the Akdamot. Welcome. The famous prayer is about the Akdamot. And we say it in certain communities, we say it every Shavuot before the reading of the Aseret HaDibrot. And this is basically Akdamot is basically a special prayer that we say before reading the Torah. And it is all about praising Hashem for the great present and gift that He gave us, which is receiving the Torah. And the Akdamot, there's a story behind it. Who wrote the Akdamot? So there was a Jewish community in Germany, where today Germany is, and they suffered tremendously from a priest. He knew witchcraft, and what he did was basically every Jew that he used to touch used to die after a few days. And at a certain point, at a certain point, he said to the Jewish people, you know what, I want to have a debate between myself and your greatest scholar. Whoever's going to win this debate will announce that his religion wins, and therefore you've all got to convert, or you'll be chased out of the country. And these are things that happen throughout history, and Am Yisrael were able to fight them because it was just about, there was no witchcraft involved and nothing like that. It was just about logical claims. And we know that the Nachmanides actually held such a debate, and he won the debate. This is not something new, but here they were very scared, because here this priest knew witchcraft. In such a case, it made it very dangerous, and they decided to go after the 10 tribes. So they sent Rabbi Meir, his name was Rabbi Meir. They sent him. He was a great Baal Zechus. He had a lot of merits. So they said, you know what, we're going to send him, and he'll be able to pick for us a person that knows how to deal with such a priest. And the story is that he went, he had 2 people guiding him on the way, and they came to this river, Samba River. And they came to the river of Samba River, and you cannot cross it. The 6 days, the Samba River throws stones, and there's no way that you can cross the river. So he thought to himself, and he said, you know what, this is a case of pikuach nefesh, right? We know that when pikuach nefesh is basically a case where there's where a person's life is in danger or at risk. So we know we are allowed to mechalel Shabbos. We can do certain things that are prohibited on Shabbos. It's not a problem because it's for saving lives. So he said, this is not a life of one person. This is the life of all the Jews in Germany. So we shouldn't be a problem passing the river on Shabbos. Which, by the way, we can't just pass a river on Shabbos. You've got to rest and settle at your place. You cannot go beyond 2,000 amot. 12,000 mile is already a doiraisa, which is something that's prohibited by the written Torah, not only the oral Torah. And there's also certain places where it's just 2,000 amot, where that's prohibited by our scholars, the oral Torah. So that's why he cannot cross the river on Shabbos. And you can carry things with you, etc. So the story is that he crossed the river on Shabbos without those 2 people that were with him, and he came and he found there the 10 tribes, and he told them the story. And there was one person, he was actually limping, and he said, I'm going to go and I'll save my brothers there in Germany. And before he left, so the only day he was able to go by this river was on Shabbos. So once again, it's for pikuach nefesh. But then Rabbi Meir, who came, could not go back. There's no reason for him now to go back. He's not going to save anyone, right? He's already there. He can't just violate the Shabbos, right? Yeah. So in that case, he needed to stay there. He wrote a get for his wife because he didn't want her to be what's called a living widow forever. So he wrote a get, and he wrote the Akdamot. These Akdamot that we have in our Siddur, we also have it in our Siddur. We don't say it, but we have it in our Siddur. That's the Chabad Minhag. The Akdamot is a special praise that he wrote, and he wanted everyone to remember him. And the story is that that person came to Germany and they held a certain debate. They describe it that it involved witchcraft and all kinds of tricks that he told him you have to hold down a tree. And this was like it was an enormous tree or something like that. So one of the 10 tribes, right, the person that came, he was able to hold it down, and then he told him, now you've got to bring down something, whatever, a certain pole, and he wasn't able to, and that's how he died. So that's describing witchcraft. So that's another story and myth about, now there's no guarantee that this story is 100% true. Again, it's a tale that people say about the Samba John. Now I would like to show you a video of, once again, we aren't 100% sure that this actually is the Samba John, but it's an interesting
how
video.
will we know?
So that's it. We can't know 100%. These are things that, and you know what? It's a good point, because I would like to speak about the Maharal's approach. Just before we show the video, the Maharal has a very interesting approach to the Samba John, and a more of a realistic approach. The Maharal says, right, the river is called Shabbos, Samba John. Why is it called Samba John? Not because of this mysterious nature that it has, but simply because the Jewish people there, they used to do trading, and they used to sell, and they used to travel from one place to another, and they used to cross this river. And that's what they did for 6 days. But when Shabbos came, they didn't cross the river anymore. Not only that, they didn't allow other people to cross the river and disturb their Shabbos. You'll walk down Share Chesed, right? The neighborhood over there, you can see that in the middle of the road, I think it's by Usishkin downwards, there are fences preventing cars from going through. And it's an emergency, of course. So that's why the river was called Samba John, not because of its nature. It was a regular river, but on Shabbos it was closed. So everyone called it the Shabbos River. That was basically the idea, because on Shabbos no one crossed the river, not because it was impossible or something like that, but simply because it was prohibited by the Jewish people living over there. Okay. So pay close attention to this river and try to see something interesting about it.
On the surface. That's supposed to be on the other side of the river.
Turn us on with video.
Okay, so it's interesting. We can see that basically that's it's not a regular river.
זהו חלק ב' של שיעור התורה, 10 השופטים. שיעור שווה לכל נפש המיועד לכל אישה הרוצה להחכים ולהעצים את עצמה.
Okay, so it could be that that was the Sambatyon and previously the Sambat, because you can see that there's something interesting about it. And it's not just, you know, sometimes there is what's it called, rocks and stones that go down with the water. Seems like there that the majority of that river is actually sand or stones or something like that. So,
I'm sorry, it looks like there was some kind of pebbles or something.
Pebbles,
that
right.
he picked up in his hand.
In his hand, yeah.
Yeah, but it didn't look like stones, you know.
Exactly, it's not like big stones and rocks.
No,
Right.
That's weird.
What happened to those Jews in Germany? Did they get, because he got killed, right? So
No, the priest got killed. I'm sorry if it wasn't understood
Oh, the
from
priest got
the
killed.
priest got killed.
Oh.
He was able to deal with his witchcraft. And yeah, so they were saved. They were saved. And this is the story about the Akdamot. If you'll read a bit in, I can refer you to a specific book that's called Ahavat Chaim. The book's called Ahavat Chaim. Very interesting stories there that he brings down. One of the stories is about the Akdamot, and that's where I brought it from. And there are other stories that also, other books that also tell the story. So once again, we cannot guarantee 100% that this actually happened in this way, but there are books that bring it down. Jewish books, Agadah, more Agadah, like tales, right? But this is their approach. And once again, always we see that in Judaism, and not only in Judaism, but generally there are two aspects, two ways to look at things. We can look at things in more of a miraculous way, and we can try and see the simple logical meaning in the story. So here about the Sambatyon, again we've got the approach of the Maharal and all the famous Midrashim that this river actually throws stones throughout the week and then just one day at rest. And then there's the literal explanation of the Maharal, which is basically that just because of the fact that Am Yisrael worked those 6 days and they were going from one side of the river to the other side, and then on the 7th day no one went, so they called it the Sambatyon because of that. And I mean, I would say that it depends each and every one on his own personal approach. If someone connects more to the miraculous story, so you're welcome, it's a great story. And if you like the simple approach, so that's the Maharal. So that's about the Sambatyon River, and about again these two approaches, and again this is also Eldad Hadani, that Jewish traveler and merchant that came during the 9th century to Jewish communities and told them about this mysterious river. By the way, he writes that that river is in Africa, in Chabad, where is Ethiopia today. And this river that we just saw, and also other people describe the river not in Africa but in Asia. Okay, so now one of the big questions is what will be exactly in the future? Will they return? Will these 10 tribes join Am Yisrael? And it's interesting because, first of all, not all of them left. We spoke about it at the beginning. Not all of the 10 tribes left. There were those, and imagine it. Am Yisrael sitting here in Eretz Yisrael, suddenly there's a big machlaikas, a big disagreement between the tribes, and some of them may have agreed to the side of Yerushalayim, to the side of Binyamin and Yehuda, and joined them. And that's again the research that was done, and they found that there was a significant increase in the residence of Jews during those years when Am Yisrael split into two. It also says, and it's brought about Yirmiyahu, the prophet Yirmiyahu, that we all know he was in the time of the destruction of the first temple. It says that he brought many of them back. Not all of them, but he brought quite a few of these 10 tribes back. And again, in those days they weren't that far, so it was easier to bring them and to, and not only that, but to track their origin, to exactly know whether they are Jewish or not. So basically, this doesn't only interest us, the story of the 10 tribes, but it interests our scholars throughout the generations. This is brought in the Talmud, and the Talmud brings a very interesting law. What happens if a Gentile decides to do what we call kiddushin, right? The chuppah, marriage, is a specific process how we can marry. And the process is a certain kinyan we acquire. And this is by giving, for example, the ring. That's the common way of doing marriage, and it's underneath the chuppah. And that moment, halachic law falls on these two individuals, and they become husband and wife. And that is the way that kiddushin actually happen. Now, what happens if a Gentile goes and he does the same process that we call kiddushin? Is there any meaning to that? If that lady wants to get married to someone else, does she need a divorce, or not?
No.
No. The basic way to look at it is that there is no meaning to that action that they do.
Yeah, it's a fiction.
It's a fiction, right? Why? Because these laws do not apply to them. Their marriage is okay. It's not a problem with the way they marry for them. But if we want to marry, there's a specific way to get married. And so we would all think that there's no meaning. But in certain places, it says that we've got to be concerned about a case when a Gentile marries someone from Am Yisrael. Why? Because maybe he is from those 10 tribes, from those last 10 tribes. And in that case, he might be Jewish. And again, the Kiddushin are Kiddushin, so a rabbi would need, if this woman wants to remarry, she would need to get a get from that person, even if he's a Gentile, because he might actually originally be one of the last 10 tribes. So that's an interesting law. And it's a discussion between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer whether these 10 tribes will return. And there are actually a few other opinions. Some opinions say that they were exiled for a reason, right? They weren't just exiled for no reason. They were exiled because they sinned with worshipping idols. So that opinion says, you know what, if they will return to the ways of Hashem, then they'll be accepted once again into Am Yisrael. And Rabbi Akiva says that it's a very sad story, but unfortunately they will not return. That's Rabbi Akiva's approach. It's interesting because Rabbi Akiva, out of all the scholars, he was one of the most famous Baalei Tshuva. He only returned to Hashem at the age of 40, but nevertheless he says that in this case of the 10 tribes, they will not return. And then we have the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer says that they will return. They will return because for that time and place they did something wrong, but at the end of the day they're still connected to Am Yisrael, they're still connected to Hashem, and that's why they will return. So those are the two approaches, and the Rebbe says that they will return. The Rebbe's approach is that not only that they will return, but the tribes of Binyamin and Yehuda, the remaining tribes that are currently with us today, they will go and search for them and bring them back in order for them to also benefit and enjoy the times of Mashiach. And this is something that's done today quite a lot, where many people have been doing research and trying to find these tribes.
Yeah, the special organizations that do it.
Special, right? I think one of them is called Shuv Ami or something like that, Return My People. And now this is a very interesting thing because this is also the Rebbe's approach about this whole concept of the 10 tribes. The Rebbe says that we don't know some of these places. For example, nations and tribes, they may not be from the 10 tribes. How come they have Jewish customs, Jewish names? Because they might have learned from Jews around them. They may have been, for example, the Pashtuns, they are actually originally an Iranian tribe, and they ended up in Pakistan, Afghanistan, and they might have learned from the Jews in Iran, the Persian Jews. Huge Jewish communities, especially in those days, but even till this very day, we have a nice amount of Jews that are living in Iran. So we don't know if they are actually 100% Jewish and they come from the 10 tribes, or they might have lived amongst Jews and they know various customs. So that's why we've got to be very cautious and very careful when it comes to the whole concept of conversion. And this is the Rebbes approach. They asked the Rebbe about the sons of Menashe and about other cases where they wanted to bring people from those places, from those areas. The Rebbe said it's best to do what's called Giur L'Chumra. Giur L'Chumra means an extra conversion, which means they might be 100% Jewish, but there's a chance that they aren't, right? And for that chance, we've got to be very, very careful about Am Yisrael, because we suffered so much. Even if we take a look at the past 100 years, Am Yisrael went through a lot of suffering, and we lost many of our brothers and sisters, and we want to make sure that the people that come into Eretz Yisrael and into Am Yisrael are 100% Jewish. We cannot play games with this. So, for this reason, the Rebbe said that we've got to do what's called Giur L'Chumra, and we cannot play with this. And again, if even if these people have strong customs that are very similar to Am Yisrael, there's no guarantee that they're 100% Jewish. Also, for another reason, there might be assimilation in those areas and those places. We know that certain tribes actually did marry only within themselves. Beta Israel, I think in Ethiopia, they married only into themselves. But other tribes from other places, there's even stories about tribes in South America that they are Jewish, but again, there's no guarantee that they actually married Jews, and therefore we don't know if their descendants are 100% Jewish. So this is basically the story of the 10 tribes. And just to summarize what we spoke about, so we spoke about the reason why they were exiled and the time that they were exiled. This is 135 years before the destruction of the first temple, and it was because of them worshipping idols. They split from the rest of Am Yisrael. Certain places and areas that they are referred to in the words of the Torah, again, where we're not sure where that is today, and we try to track those places down. In Ethiopia, the sons of Menashe, in Myanmar, and that area, Afghanistan, right, the Pashtuns, and some people even say that the Jewish people of Cochin, which is in India, and China also,
and Japan.
So that's it. Japan, they have, and my wife's grandfather was there once, and I think it's called the city of Isa, something like that. They have there a temple, and the temple is divided, and there's like the holiest of holies, that's what they call it. There's an inner temple where they have a certain, I don't know what exactly it is, but there's a Magen David on that. And there's a lot of traditions that are similar in their religion, the Japanese religion, that are similar to the Jewish religion. So once again, could be they are...
And there's places that supposedly have Jewish names for no logical reason in Japan.
Also names of places, right. So we spoke about that in Afghanistan, and that's what's interesting, also Japan.
The group in Japan, they wear talisim and the kippot.
Kippot, yeah. Right. So we can see those are actually, it's easier to relate to those stories. By the way, there's a group in Denmark that claim that they're from the tribe of Dan. Denmark, Dan. And it's interesting, but we cannot know. Some people even try to say that in Britain, because Britannia comes from the word Bris, right? It's similar, doesn't it?
No.
Britain. But,
British.
sorry?
British.
British. British.
People
Yes.
of the.
People of the,
Right. So,
even the Native American Indians
Yeah,
Also,
too, yeah.
have customs very similar to Orthodox Judaism. Yeah.
the tribes in South America and Central America that they claim that they are part of the 10 tribes. So once again, it could possibly be that they are one of the 10 tribes, and it could be that they are not, and they just learned from the customs of Jews that lived with them or something like that. And just to bring it down here, we've got to be as sure as we can when it comes to the subject of conversion, and that's why the Rebbe suggested that any person who wants to join, even if he has a great background of connection to the Jewish people, he's got to go through a process which is called Giyur L'Chumra, which is just, we are extra careful about that. And that's it. We spoke about the Samba River. Is it really this mysterious river that has a superpower or something like that? Or just literally it means that there was no working on Shabbos during in that place. And we spoke about, of course, the machlekes, whether they will return at the end of days. And the conclusion is that they will, and hopefully as soon as possible. We're looking forward. So once again, thank you very, very much for coming out.